Welcome to Talk It Over. I'm so thankful that you joined us for this conversation about the message that Jesus has spoken through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. Today, we are beginning our conversation with this premise, with this understanding, that every person has a chance to be a lifesaver. Everybody gets an opportunity in their life to save other people's lives. Everybody has the means to do that. Now, this is what I'd like you to talk about first. What is it that is stopping you from being a lifesaver? What in your life is prohibiting you or inhibiting you or keeping you from being a lifesaver in your community? Is it fear? Is it, I want you to be really specific too. Is it skepticism or pessimism about the future? What are those things that are keeping you from being the kind of person that maybe brings about healing and hope for people in Africa, or helps a homeless person, or helps a person in need? Have you ever seen an emergency where you just didn't step up? What's stopping you from being a lifesaver? Okay, now I'd like you to read Matthew 5, verse 21 through 22a, so halfway through verse 22. Now this is the summary of what Jesus is saying, essentially that lifesavers are not restrained by anger. When you read that verse, I want you to really circle that word anger. It's very, very important. The word anger, you'll probably hear familiar words, but it's orge. It's this another word that's similar to it is ogre, if you think about it in the German. It's that idea of someone who's harboring resentment. It's not the kind of anger like thume is another Greek word for anger, but that just means lighting, the kind of anger that where it lights little kindling on fire really fast, that kind of anger. That's immediate anger. Jesus is talking here about an anger that people hold on to. It's like a grudge. It's darker than that, and it's kind of where we just essentially other scriptures have interpreted this word as hate. So when we have hate toward other people, Jesus is saying that true lifesavers don't have that kind of restraint, because when you have hate or you have anger, you become confined yourself. Here's a tough and cool question to ask each other. Do you harbor anger toward anyone or anything? Is there any anger that you have toward other people? And then there's a follow-up question. How important does Jesus say it is to resolve this anger, and why? Okay, now I'd like you to read Matthew 5, verse 22b, so the second half of verse 22. Okay, what Jesus is saying is what you say matters. What you say, actual words that you speak. I don't know if you've had that experience in your past where people have said things and you remember them forever, and if they're hurtful things, they really cause pain and suffering in your own life. Jesus would say that anything that degrades others is out of bounds. Anything that dehumanizes or takes away their humanity is off limits, as much as murder. He'd say, if you think murder is a bad thing, he says, it's no different if you just rob people of their humanity. Talk about the unkind, how unkind words have affected you in your life. And do they stay with you? And it's okay, you can give some examples. This is a safe space to do that. This is another point that I'd like you to think about coming out of this scripture. Now, Jesus says that there are only two trajectories for our life: give life or take life. An interesting way to think about it. Jesus would say, hey, you know what? You're either on the murder track or you're on the life-giving track. You're on the taking life track or the giving life track. And he said, if you are someone who's just a little bit full of hate, it doesn't matter. You're on that path. You're on that trajectory. You're going to end up in the same place. Now, I'd like you to talk together and share a time when you remember someone forgiving you, and share how it made you feel. Okay, now I'd like you to read Matthew 5, verse 23 through 24. Here's a summary of what Jesus would be saying, is that God gives you freedom. Imagine someone going to the altar, they're bringing their offering, and that offering is a symbol of their brokenness, that wounded or killed animal that they're bringing forward, or that sacrifice from their own life. That's how much pain and wound and suffering they have presented in the world. But then essentially they're walking into that relationship of the offering to the altar and asking God for forgiveness, which they know God will provide for them. And then the scripture says, or Jesus says, no, that's not healing. Jesus says healing is when you free others. Not just when you receive forgiveness from God and you appeal to God and walk into that relationship, that forgiven relationship with God, but when you also forgive others and you receive forgiveness from others by saying, I'm sorry. So with that, is there anyone in your life that you are currently holding in captivity, that you are essentially imprisoning in their life because you haven't said, I forgive you? Is there anybody that you're doing that with? Or maybe because you haven't said, I'm sorry, and that just relationship is constrained in a terrible way. Share that with your friends. Okay, now we're going to read Matthew 5, verse 25 through 26. Now, what Jesus is telling us and reminding us is that lifesavers don't hesitate to be about rescuing. They get right to it, and that way they don't lose their life. The question I'd like to ask you is, why do you think that many people choose to harbor or anger rather than give forgiveness? Why is it? Why do people do that? Why don't they just say, I forgive you, and why don't they mean it? And here's a follow-up question. How or should this be changed? I have a feeling that this was one of the more intense conversations that you guys have had as a group, and I'm proud of you for having it. I pray that it was a blessing for each and every one of you. Next week, we're going to have a really, really great conversation, one that is also going to cause you to dig deep in your life, and it is a conversation called The Importance of Integrity, and it is based on Jesus' next teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. So we hope that you enjoyed this conversation with us today, and we look forward to the conversations that we're going to have in the future. Have a good one.